And thank you for hosting this for us today. I'm gonna beg your forgiveness in that I'm fighting some strained vocal cords, which seems to speak to the amount of speaking that I've done lately, but I'm excited to be in front of a diverse audience, and I hope we get you really hard questions and you hold us all to task. I'm running for Mayor of Tucson for the very same reasons as the people sitting up here for me today. There is wasteful spending, our crime is out of control, we are suffering from a homelessness crisis, and our infrastructure is failing. As a fiscal conservative, I'm sorry.
Your mic went out.
Oh,
You're
it's
good.
It's
Okay.
Okay. Does that come off my time? So, as a fiscal conservative, I believe in taking city taxpayer dollars and focusing those dollars on the services that are to be provided per our city charter. I too would eliminate fare-free busing, and I would focus the dollars on public safety, our transportation department. When I say that, I mean our roads. And I would focus on creating business-friendly policies. Business-friendly policies coupled with a cleaner, safer Tucson will not only retain businesses, it will attract businesses to Tucson, and creating a competitive job market and opportunities for our citizens. A competitive job market means higher salaries. We have a tremendous amount of people living in poverty, and we can provide for them by creating opportunities. And that's what I would do as mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions, so we had our opening statements, and our candidates had up to 3 minutes. So with our next questions, you will have up to 2 minutes. So we're gonna shorten your time just a little bit. All right. So as you all were, we shared this information with you about our organizations, who we are, what we hope to accomplish this evening. We are particularly interested in the Black and African American community. And we know that African Americans here in Tucson make up approximately 4% of the population. So if elected, what are your plans specifically for the Black and African American community? Another way to ask the question, how will you engage this often overlooked and forgotten population that is so important and rich to the Tucson community? You can choose.
Okay, I'll go first. My response is public safety, economic development, parks, clean up the parks, the same thing that just the general things that are in the city charter that are required of mayor and council need to be equal for all people in our community. Everyone that goes to the local convenience store needs to feel safe. We need to make sure that we get a handle on crime. We need to make sure that we face head-on this fentanyl crisis. And singling out any one particular group, I want to single out the lawless criminals that are the people that are causing havoc in our community. As far as the African American population or the Native American population or any other population, what we want to do is provide a clean, healthy, and safe environment for those groups to grow and to prosper in our community with good jobs, good paying jobs, good benefits, be able to stay in Tucson after they go to school here at the U of A or Pima College, or even go to JTAD or wherever they're going to school, to stay in Tucson and not have their young family members take off and leave and go somewhere else because they don't feel Tucson has the opportunity for that. So specifically what I would do is I would make Tucson safe, I would make it clean, I would make it friendly, I would make it environmentally savvy, and I would make it economically sound so that the people that are from those populations will stay here in Tucson and be active in their own communities and help us fix Tucson, because that's what we all need to do, come together and fix Tucson.
Thank you.
I believe that everyone should be treated equally, and we should all have equal opportunity, equal rights, and that's a pillar of government in the United States, and that should be the foundation of every law that we pass, including city statutes.
Hold the mic closer.
Oh, sorry.
I did the same thing.
I don't think there should be laws that single out any particular race or heritage. I think that we should all be treated equally, and that should be expected of every business and every person. That's part of freedom is the right to have people insult you and be able to deal with it. It may happen, but it doesn't mean that talk is freedom of speech, even if it's offensive speech. It's part of the foundation of America.
So as a person who's not a member of the Black community, I would ask how it is that you feel you are underrepresented. All persons need to be created equal, and if we're not creating people equal, that needs to be addressed. But I will not prioritize a race or an ability or a sexual preference over any other race, disability, sexual preference. But equality is easier said than done. So we work together as a community and we find togetherness. And one thing that we stopped doing was having a conversation. When I was a child, something went right. I lived in a family that was a racist family, but there wasn't a racist bone in my body. I remember my father telling me I couldn't go to a party because the little girl was Black. I remember my mother refusing entry to our home because someone was Black. And we fought it. But something has happened where that conversation has ceased, and we all have a responsibility to restore that conversation and find out our differences. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're ahead of schedule, so we got a little bit of time. We writing all kinds of good things back here. But we're ahead of schedule, so we got a little bit of time for some clarification, and I'd like to clarify the question. The question is not intended to ask you about creating special laws that are based on identity, although we know that those exist in ways that are oppressive to the African American community. We're not able in many instances to educate not just African American and Black youth, but all of our youth. So we're not, the question is not intended to say whether or not you will prioritize any particular group, even though we know these things are already happening that are discriminating against, that are continuing systematic racism against the group in which the question is about. So if you want to clarify or add anything with that additional piece of information, please feel free to do so. And also, we said, let's ask the hard questions. Tell me how. It's very easy to say we want to do this, we want to do that, but let's talk about the action in that. How will you do that?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So beginning with me. So I stick with my original answer. I first need to understand what the underrepresentation is. And again, back to the conversation. Once you have the conversation and you understand the issues, then you can go back and evaluate the problem. Everyone knows this in this room, right? But if there is evidence of racism and there is evidence found that there is oppression, then that needs to be dealt with within the extent of the law. And it really is fundamentally that easy. What is more complex is the differences of opinions in these rooms, what those things are, and what exists and what doesn't exist. So we have a lot of talking to do, and that's where it starts. And we live by example, and, oh, thank you. And we give each other grace and understanding, and in cases, and You know, Cherie Lauren, I'd invite you to come up and speak to me all the time. As mayor, I invite all constituents to come up and speak with me to find out what the issues are. As the mayor of Tucson, you're being told that everything's hunky-dory, and we know it's not. Thank you.
Arthur?
I agree with a lot of what Janet said. I believe that eliminating racism and discrimination is something that just needs to be a part of our culture and part of our the way we deal with others. And it should be, people who don't do that should be shunned by society, but I don't think there should be specific laws to prevent people from being a bigot. And that's my belief on it.
I have a couple of specific things that I would recommend. First off, I just want to say that public safety is really, really important to everyone that lives in our community. And so I think that goes to our schools. I think there's obviously across the nation over the last several years, there's been an obvious mismatch between police and certain populations and so forth. We have talked about that at length with Chief Kazmar at the police department of what they're doing to mitigate that. My friend Dr. Lehman Benson is the head of DEI, he's the vice president at the University of Arizona, and the university has made a great effort in trying to incorporate a whole, matter of fact, the land notice is read at every single University of Arizona major function. And there's a recognition that we have maybe a problem, let's maybe do some things to fix it. So here's some things I would do. One, school resource officers. We need to bring back the school resource officers so we can develop a relationship with young people, specifically children of color who are in a situation where they might not have a good relationship with the police right now. Let's turn that around. Let's have good people. I would challenge the NAACP and other groups, bring forth some candidates who could go on the police force and be police officers and help us change the culture from within and help come and be part of that force so that we can address those issues internally. I'm also a marketing guy, and I believe that we need to do a lot of work in the marketing area in terms of educating the community as well as recruiting people for city jobs and also retaining them once they get in there. So it's a culture that the city of Tucson needs to adopt, which is to help our citizens understand the opportunities that are available to them.
Thank you. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a military spouse. I came here, my husband is based at Fort Huachuca. I have lived in major metropolitan cities. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, lived in Nashville, lived in Atlanta for about 10 years. I'm also an attorney, I have my own business. One thing that has been very polarizing to me since being in Tucson is the lack of recruitment and retaining of African American young professionals. I think that diversity is the bedrock of any successful city. And so it's not just, like we said, about making laws or giving preference to a marginalized group of people, but I think the number here, based off of the amount of military families that come in here, the amount of people that work at Raytheon, the amount of people that work at the University of Arizona, and at the first chance that they get, they leave the city for a more progressive one that they feel more comfortable, more where the room has more representation. So if you were elected to mayor, what, if anything, would you do to help recruit and retain particularly young African American or people of color? And it's not necessarily about the safety, because we do have different issues as young professionals. Like, I mean, just keeping in mind who I'm asking about, versus people that don't necessarily have the same job opportunities. I'm talking about people that can add to the community, young Black lawyers, young Black doctors, young Black professors, young Black engineers, or any people of color. What would you do, if anything, to recruit and retain them?
Want to go first?
You can, we can mix it up a little bit unless somebody else wants to go.
First off, thank you and your family for your service to our country. And secondly, can we tell your story? We need to tell your story. We need to tell the story of the young Black professionals who are in our community, who are serving our community in a variety of different ways. That's why I call it a marketing problem. We need to tell that story to those young Black kids, those young African Americans, those young Native Americans that are in our schools, who can understand that if they stay in Tucson, they have an opportunity here and that they will be welcome here. We need to tell Pima College students and University of Arizona students not to get on the first plane out of Tucson, but to stay here, open businesses, become attorneys, maybe join the police force, and make a home for themselves in Tucson. I think this is something that's been missed, is that we don't tell the story enough about the good things that are happening for the young people that are contributing to our community. So for me as mayor, Bully Pulpit, let's tell those stories. Let's share that information so that others can see that you can have a law firm in Tucson and be a lawyer and have a commitment to staying in Tucson because you're earning a meaningful living. So that's the number one thing I would do. Secondly, the door is open at the mayor's office. When I'm the mayor, bring it on. Let's bring anybody in to have a conversation with me about what ideas you might have that you might be able to bring to us as a professional and as a lawyer. You might have some ideas that would help us reach out to those community members who might not be being served in the right way or perhaps even being ignored. And so we need to get with Barbara Coffey from the economic development side and say, how can we build a program so that people of color can benefit from the economic explosion that's going to take place, and how can they be part of that so they don't pack up and leave Tucson when they're finished. So I'm all about telling your story, and I'm about retaining and keeping people who come here, give them an opportunity so that they can grow their families right here at Tucson.
Thank you.
I believe that the story of people like Clarence Thomas and Charles Payne, Crispus Attucks, are the stories that need to be told by everyone and taught in grade schools and high schools, so that people know the success that's possible in the United States. I don't know that that is an appropriate role for the city government to be participating in, even though it is something that I think everyone should do on their own. We need to always keep in mind the success that's possible if we are all treated fairly and equally, and I hope that that's sufficient.
We just appreciate honesty, so it isn't about sufficiency or anything else. We just want to hear your thoughts.
Okay, Lauren, thank you for your question. One thing I'll say is the city of Tucson as an entity is responsible for the management of the city of Tucson. And I mean that as in a business structure. Sorry, I had to put in a lozenge, forgive it, got stuck in my throat. And as a business structure, I was previously employed by the city of Tucson. It is not the most opportunist organization in that we overvalue a college education. They'll place people into management positions and not give lower level positions opportunities for career growth. So as mayor, I will charge the city manager. The city manager is responsible for running the departments, for empowering their staffing to create opportunities and career growth with focusing on their skills, not their degree, their skills and their contributions to that program. As far as recruiting, we should recruit across the board. And if that involves bringing in let me backtrack just a second. And to Arthur's point and to Ed's point, we need to educate people. And that happens in the schools. And city officials should be in our schools encouraging the completion of an education and staying away from drugs, and then creating opportunities for people to find employment in the city with upward mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have some questions from the audience, so we can open it up a little bit. And I also have some cards, so if there's a question from the audience, we can go ahead and pass the mic. If not, I can read one of the card questions.
His
Do you
question.
have a question? Say your hand up. Okay. Okay.
His question.
All right. Community questions. All right. What can the mayor do what can the mayor do in the battle versus fentanyl? The battle versus fentanyl.
Fentanyl is a huge crisis in our community. It's killing our children, and it's vastly contributing to the homelessness problem. The city mayor can staff our police department, and that will take a lot of effort and a lot of money to enforce our laws. We need to prosecute the smugglers and the drug dealers and seek care for those suffering from drug addiction through qualified programs, not through city programs, through qualified charitable programs. Fentanyl is horribly addictive, it's destructive, and it's gonna take a village to stop it. The cartels are making a great deal of money by bringing the fentanyl in, and the people who are smuggling it in are emboldened. So the way we stop fentanyl is by enforcing our laws. Beyond that, it's by community outreach. It's talking in the classrooms about the dangers of drugs. I, for one, grew up with Nancy Reagan, not literally, she's a little older than me, but with the just say no model. It worked for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. Just as any other program wouldn't work for everyone. So you attack it on multiple levels. And for those who are addicted, we try to provide them care. And if they refuse that care, then they will either have to be punished by the extent of the law, or sadly lose their lives. Thank you.
And I do have a follow-up question on that, because it sounds like kind of what you're talking about is what we saw with the war on drugs that didn't necessarily work in other communities. And we have seen that when it comes to fentanyl, my understanding is that other cities have used more diversion programs or something of that nature versus actually threatening jail time for these people. So are you proposing more of like a war on drugs type structure or something of that nature or something different?
I'm proposing jail time for the people who are dealing and smuggling in drugs. Absolutely, 100%. That's the start of the problem. The people who are suffering from addiction, yes, there are diversion programs, but not at the expense of the taxpayer. Fiscal responsibility means sometimes making tough decisions, and the city mayor is bound by the city charter in providing those services as called for in the city charter. There are wonderful organizations, and Tucsonans are very generous. I say we give the tax dollars back to the people and let them invest those dollars as they see fit, but all the while we'll have community outreach in trying to get help. Again, fentanyl is hugely addictive, and a person will be willing to give up their life for that addiction, and to me that's very, very sad. But yeah, tough crime on smugglers and dealers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a question that I think I'm going to disagree with Ed and Janet on. We as libertarians believe in the legalization of all drugs, and the city of Tucson has, and the state of Arizona, I believe, has pretty much repealed any regulation of the marijuana industry, and as a result we have marijuana businesses all over town now that are operating legally and openly, even though there's still federal laws prohibiting that. The war on drugs is making the drug dealers multimillionaires. It's funding the smugglers. It's contributing to creating border crossing routes that ordinary migrants wouldn't have if the drug kingpins weren't building them all and creating them. I believe that fentanyl is the same, and And the criminals in the drug industry are the victims also. It's the people who are, because they cannot fund their drug addiction, are going and shoplifting and robbing people and trespassing, and those laws should be enforced. And unfortunately, you enforce those minor laws strictly, it's going to cut down a lot on a lot of those crimes and make Tucson a safer and better place. And it's going to force those drug addicts to either seek treatment or find a real job to fund it. So unfortunately, I think that's the correct route to go on the drug front, because people are choosing to do drugs on their own, even though they know it's destructive.
Thank you.
I've lived in Tucson all of my life, and I believe that the fentanyl issue is the single most important public safety issue that's, in my 64 years here, it's the single most important thing that we've, it's caused an increase in the crime rate, 97 murders in 2021, 67 murders last year. We're on target for about that same. Many of those, the traffic accidents that we see with pedestrians being killed, a lot of that can be attributed to 82%, I believe, of the pedestrian accidents. When they do the autopsy, there's fentanyl or present in those or drugs, methamphetamine. So I believe in a couple of things. I'm with the 4,000 businesses that have formed the Tucson Crime Free Coalition. They have proposed a transition center next to the jail where you would bring in fentanyl people who have either been turned in by the police, or they could even come down by themselves to have a one-stop shop for them to be able to get some help, or if they're brought in by the police, then adjudicated right there on the spot. If you talk to Lisa Chastain, who's at the Gospel Rescue Mission and helping at the HSL Family Foundation out on Palo Verde, 11 states and one foreign country have been out there to see the model. It's a one-stop model to help people who are addicted to fentanyl to come out and to get clean and to go through a process of beating this terrible affliction. To our county attorney needs to be held accountable. Our county attorney is not prosecuting fentanyl, people who have been using fentanyl and been caught by it. Many of them are being let out. They're caught by the police, they're taken down to the county attorney, to the jail, and they're released back into the community without much. So the things I want to do are interdiction to get to these people. We need to disrupt these homeless camps where the fentanyl is an issue. We need to disrupt these I'll come back to these issues.
I do have a quick follow-up for you. You mentioned that the county attorney isn't prosecuting those crimes. Are you proposing replacing the county attorney, or do you have a problem with that? Because they do have wide discretion to prosecute or not to prosecute any crimes.
They do have wide discretion. She does indicate that she is following state law and that her hands are tied in many cases. We've had the discussion with the municipal courts and the magistrate of the municipal courts. Is there a municipal misdemeanor option that we could look at? That's what Oro Valley and Marana have adopted, is some municipal ordinances and enforcing those ordinances to try and, you talk to business people who have been affected by this. I can tell you story after story of a person who's addicted to fentanyl coming in and stealing something from the store, walking out. If you call the police, they take them down to the to the jail. They go through the process, and later that afternoon they're back in the same place that they were earlier in the morning. And so we have this endless cycle of going through, and you talk about discretion. Police officers now have a stand-down order to not issue citations for people on medians or in front of stores or in these homeless camps. They're not issuing as they wait for clarity from a state issue that is being adjudicated by another jurisdiction. And so it's just an endless cycle of fentanyl users. They need to be disrupted in their usage, and the best way to do that is to get them the treatment that they need so that they can stop the habit. And just having, not doing anything is an issue, I think, with, and so that's where I talked about interdiction, enforcement, adjudication, incarceration if needed, because they need about 9 days to start thinking clearly, and then education and marketing, everybody. We can't be having people giving $20 bills to fentanyl addicts on the medians. That's just not a good way to solve this problem.
May I follow up with some clarification?
Please.
I just want to clarify, and my good friend Arthur knows this about me. I am anti-drug.
I don't think legalizing marijuana was
It's a good idea for our community.
as such
We are number 5 on the
DUI rate, but the voters voted for it. And because the voters voted for it, we allow for it.
But
I wholeheartedly disagree
agree with Lee.
legalizing drugs. So you understand where I'm coming from. It's not healthy, it's killing our children, and it's ruining our society. That's all I just wanted to clarify. No offense to you, Arthur.
Could I follow up?
We're going to start punching soon.
Yeah, we're working on another mic. Yeah.
No matter what legalization of drugs was ever enacted, we would always support restricting them for people underage. Parents have to be able to have discretion over those sorts of things. Even among libertarians, that's the view.
All right, so we'll come to you next. So I recognize that the question was asking, and it was a community question, so hopefully I asked it in the way that you intended, was about fentanyl, and I understand that your responses have to do with those who might be selling it, who might be giving it to folks. But as we know in our community and in many communities, addiction is a real thing. And health and wellness is something that we talk a lot about. How can we help folks who are addicted to different drugs and have mental health issues, which I haven't heard us mention here quite yet. And so I would be very interested in hearing a little bit more about how you might support those community members. And I think I may have heard it with some that it's on the responsibility of the individual. But when we think about some of the factors that impact addiction, it could be employment, lack of housing, lack of support. It could be domestic violence. There could be so many issues. How do you support the person who doesn't want to be addicted to fentanyl, doesn't want to have that addiction or to engage in some of the things they may engage in, but for them it is about survival?
Yes. Whomever would like to go first.
We'll let you think on that.
Oh, here.
Yep. There you go. We'll go ahead and pass. While we're figuring that.
Okay, so how should the city of Tucson specifically, right? So the city of Tucson, once again, has a responsibility to govern at the consent of the people and protect their rights, as well as provide those services called out for in the city charter. Helping the people with mental illness and drug addiction is not part of that responsibility. And there is a fine line between compassion and enabling. But we encourage in the city of Tucson, and this gets to how we would help those people, volunteerism, support through our many charities, the advisement to children in the school system to stay away from drugs. And whatever that message is, I don't know. But we have a horrible crisis right now. And mental illness is a big part of that, and addiction is a big part of that. So it will, in fact, take a village to solve this problem. The mayor alone and the mayor and the council cannot come up with policies that are fiscally responsible and address the issue of this crisis. America's in crisis, but we can start with our community. The other thing we can do is bring businesses to Tucson, as I talked about earlier. And bringing those businesses to Tucson we create opportunities. And we do that by partnering with those businesses. And they facilitate that assistance, not at taxpayer expense.
Thank you. Short pause.
Sorry, I'm just gonna test this mic versus the other mic. One moment.
Anyone need a note card? Questions? Note card?
Hello.
Treatment for any kind of drug addiction is something that we all have to help our fellow man participate in. Not becoming addicted, but there are a lot of bad things in the world that people do that we cannot stop, or we should not attempt to stop. We need to teach people not to do things that are self-destructive rather than attempt to regulate. We don't ban guns, we teach firearm safety. Drugs are the same. They're bad, but some drugs can be useful in small quantities. If the drug industry was not a black market industry, if it was an open business, there would be a lot more regulation of content and purity and things that, and drug dealers would not want to have, they certainly want their patients to be their patients, their buyers to be addicted, but they don't want to kill them, so there might be some incentive to control the supply in that respect. That is my view as a libertarian. I think that making drugs illegal is very destructive to our society. It gives an incentive to a lot of people to do a lot of terrible things, and the downside is worse than the upside in the drug, and the war on drugs, in my opinion.
The fentanyl issue is a national issue. Obviously, it's a state issue, and the mayor and council need to work with the county, the state, and federal officials to have a coordinated effort to try and adjudicate and interdict in this problem. The fire department, 2 weeks ago, we went out with the fire department all day, and of the dozen or so calls that we went on, all but one of them was a fentanyl call. And it was a call because someone had overdosed or was having problems with fentanyl. And the first response is a medical response and a social services response. So the city has already invested quite a bit of money in social workers and people to help when the fire department arrives. Not only does the medical team arrive, but also a person to help get them the help that they need for going somewhere to get mental health services or addiction services as needed. We put the police in a terrible position. They are acting as social workers, as trying to solve this problem on a legal basis, but also then trying to solve it as a social thing. So this has become a problem. We need to get these fentanyl users into treatment. I was in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, and the mayor of San Diego kind of threw up the white flag and said, we can't continue to do this. The city doesn't have the funds to continue to do the same things over and over again and expect the same different outcomes. As you know, the mayor of Los Angeles also said that recently, that they were kind of tapped out for what they can do. This is going to come home to roost in Tucson soon here. We're going to run out of federal funds shortly from the COVID money and the extra funds that we've gotten. We've got to address this issue now before it gets out of hand and we have a homeless and fentanyl crisis on our hands that we're not able to solve.
Thank you. We have somebody from the audience.
Hi, Mr. Ackerley, I just wanted to let you know that the Board of Supervisors recently did pass ordinances to put up signs on the medians in the city of Tucson, so you did not mention that. The other thing I wanted to ask about is the schools. The school districts have had epically failing scores for the last few years, COVID aside. And I wanted to ask, what would the mayor do in partnership with the school district, if possible, to be able to help increase the scores, increase the availability of the schools to many who cannot go? And what would you do to improve the overall environment at Tucson Unified?
So the city of Tucson mayor has no jurisdiction over the Tucson Unified School District. Our schools are failing, we know that happened, we know it's happening, and with COVID, the problem became exponentially worse. What the mayor and the city department leadership can do is get inside those classrooms with police officers, with fire officers, with volunteers, and encourage good study habits and completing the education. Tucson is unfortunately horribly undereducated. We have a very high dropout rate, and that is only going to be made worse with students being so far behind their grade levels. What happened with COVID was they didn't just lose the year they were on their classroom, they lost multiple years. The other thing the mayor can do is encourage volunteerism. But the mayor cannot go into our classrooms and tell our teachers how they're gonna run their class, tell our school boards how they're gonna run their schools. They can only have conversations and collaborate with how to improve our test scores, I take back that test score stuff because test scores are not what makes a student. The ability to read and write and function and learn is what makes a student. But again, not my job, but I'd love to see it change because our children are, I don't know, is that our children are our future? Is that a Michael Jackson song? We are so better.
We are the world.
Whitney Houston.
That's it.
Oh, my bad.
He did one too.
If it's not Neil Diamond or contemporary Christian, I'm not listening to it, so you'll have to
Oh
forgive
my
me.
goodness, Neil Diamond, right.
Yes, I think
My
that
album.
our schools should not have been shut down even for COVID. I think that
Right.
was a
I
big
agree.
factor in putting our students behind. But it's also always a temptation, if you can get away with not coming to work. That's what the teachers did. They said, we'll just stay home for a couple of years and teach from home. Well, it doesn't work out. When you give people an option to get paid without doing any work, they're gonna choose to get paid without doing any work. And that's the flaw in a lot of these kinds of programs. And we need to not let that happen again.
I think the mayor plays a significant role in education of our young people, just by the mere fact that the mayor has the bully pulpit and is looked to by other people. I go to events all the time and people walk up to me and talk to me about schools and education and so forth. It isn't under the purview, under the charter, for the mayor to be in charge of the schools, but the mayor certainly has a responsibility to advocate. Literacy is a problem in the city of Tucson. We have very low reading scores and literacy rates from students, and we have third grade reading level at sixth grade or eighth grade or even in high school is not a good place for us to be. This is an economic development issue as well. When people come into Tucson and think about whether or not they're going to start a company here in Tucson, they need to know that there are good schools and that their kids are going to get a great education no matter what school district they go to. And so the mayor plays a significant role in making sure that the community supports. I teach teachers. One of my other jobs is I'm a Northern Arizona University professor as well. I just was with 13 teachers from 5 different districts yesterday talking about how we can do better in the classroom and raise the scores for all students through what we can do. Senator Gowan was there yesterday from the state legislature talking to us about appropriations and how the state, who funds education and makes most of the rules related to education in our state, come from the superintendent of public instruction from the state as well as the state legislature. And so we need to work with them and have them be an important player in this as well. But the school districts need to take responsibility for educating our kids and getting the literacy rate up. And I think the mayor plays a significant role in that by echoing these concerns from the community about how our students are learning and what they're learning.
Thank you. We have another audience question.
Good evening. I actually have two questions. The first part of the question is, what do you think makes a successful mayor? And the second one is, what sets you apart from the other candidates?
Thank you.
First, I'm an independent. I am right down the middle. I want to steal a term that a Boston mayor once said: that pothole is not a Democrat pothole and it's not a Republican pothole. That's our pothole. That's a Tucson pothole. Let's get that together and fix that pothole together. On the municipal level, Marana, Oro Valley, Sahuarita, they elect their councils in a nonpartisan way. They run 5, 6, 8, 10 candidates, and the best 2 or 3 win, and then from there, they elect a mayor from that group. What makes me, I've had a 47-year career in the advertising business. I've led over 24 groups as either chairman or president, including the world's largest advertising association, the American Advertising Federation. I was the chairman for 2 years. I've worked with countless nonprofits in Tucson in leadership development. I teach leadership at the University of Arizona and have for 30 years. And I've lived here all of my life, and I know what Tucson can be. I know what the Tucson was that I grew up in, and I know with good leadership that I can provide where we can take Tucson in the coming years, and that is to solve some of these problems that seem to just keep going on and on and on. How do we stand up and say, we're not going to take it anymore, and we're going to fix these issues, whatever it takes. Let's come together and fix it. We have the skill, and we have the talent in Tucson. We have engagement with Pima College, University of Arizona, Davis Mountain Air Force Base, Raytheon, plus all these nonprofits, NGOs, and groups. Let's pull them together. Let's solve our problems together. And the mayor is the person that's going to bring those people together to do this. I'm back out.
Thank you.
So I believe that the mayor's duty is to lead the city and be honest with the people of Tucson. And I think that the way to be honest is to do what's best for the city and what's best for the people without regard to one's own benefit or one's own agenda. I think that the more the government does, the easier it is for mayors and city councilmen to be paid off, overtly or covertly, for giving the contract to some favored group. But when the government does as little as possible, if it focuses on the police and the fire and keeping the streets smooth, it doesn't have nearly as much temptation to become oppressive to the people. And I think that government is always growing. It's our responsibility to shrink it. Thank you.
Thank you. It was Yolanda, right?
Yes.
Yolanda, thank you for the question, because that was actually part of my intro that I completely skipped over due to nerves. So look, I have 35 plus years of experience. I have an advanced degree. I'm currently employed as a subcontracts administrator. I was previously employed as a contracts administrator with Raytheon, and prior to that, I was with the City of Tucson City Manager's Office. I have an in-depth understanding about how city government works, as well as I'm very knowledgeable on local, state, and federal regulations. Again, I'll say it, the city charter dictates how you run the government. And the Constitution, the Arizona Constitution, as with the United States Constitution dictates how you run government. I'm well aware of that, and in addition to that, and you cannot just randomly pass laws. You govern at the consent of the people. It is that simple. And with that said, and what's more important is my utter commitment to Tucson. I'm here, I am running for this office, and I'm gonna tell you right now, if anyone at this table says it's easy, it is not easy. It is hard. But I'm running for office for everyone in this room, whether you like me or not, because our city is declining. And it is because of that commitment, I am the best candidate for mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. And this question comes from another audience member. As an educator in this city who works tirelessly to support students in this city, I can tell you that policing students will not change test scores, and educators are expected to do a lot more than teach reading, writing, and math. How do you propose that policing students will raise test scores?
If I gave off the implication that I would police students, it was not my intention. Again, the city of Tucson, mayor and council have no jurisdiction over our cities. My sister is an educator, and she has had a horrible last 5 years. And she worked very hard during COVID. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to her students. We didn't know what we didn't know then. So people stayed home to stop the spread, and then it kept getting longer and longer and longer, and that's very unfortunate, and our children suffered. As an educator, I imagine your job is incredibly difficult, and if we can encourage people to volunteer in those classrooms and alleviate some of those stresses to help with the reading, writing, arithmetic, sure, but the other issues are called on our teachers to teach. Now remember, our educators are also, they're checking for the children's health and well-being and dealing with different emotions and stresses every day. So I do support our educators, just as I support my sister. It's just not the city of Tucson's job to get in the classroom. That's the teachers and the school board. But we can encourage volunteerism and collaborate with our school districts to figure out ways to have business partners create after-school programs. And this time I won't quote Whitney Houston. But I was trying to think of another song, but all these Neil Diamond songs came to mind. So I respect our educators, and I respect everyone in this room. It's not easy. Thank you.
We have a community question that is not written.
Hi. I was,
Oh, I'm sorry.
oh, I was ready. Come back.
That's okay. As far as education, I agree with Janet that the city doesn't really have much discretion over that. But, and I don't agree with policing the schools, but just making sure that kids show up goes a long way, I think, and let the teachers be the police of their own classrooms. But if everybody shows up, they've got nothing better to do than teach and learn.
I don't believe in policing students as either. I believe that we need to celebrate students. In that same class that I talked to you about last week we talked about that school districts, unfortunately, and individual classes don't do the greatest job in the world of telling the rest of the community the good things that they're doing. What we see are the test scores and the results on the state testing and so forth. But we need to begin to tell the story of the wonderful teachers that are providing excellent services to our students. My wife is an educator of 30 years, first grade. She's been teaching first grade. She informed me the other day that this is her last year coming up. But she has dedicated her life to helping young people learn how to read. She's a reading specialist. and celebrating the good things that they can learn in school. Where I do believe that police have a role is to help keep those kids safe while they're trying to learn, while their teachers are working with them and they're doing good things. Providing school resource officers is not policing the kids, it's making sure that the gangs don't infiltrate, making sure that the sex traffickers don't come in and prey on those kids. It's about keeping that educational system safe so that those teachers can do their professional service and do their job, and those kids can develop a relationship with law enforcement so they're not afraid of them, but they're interacting with them in a positive way. And so I believe that we need to celebrate the schools, we need to celebrate the professional teachers that we have, and I'll make a plug for my wife now that she's retiring. We need to pay our teachers a lot more money for what they do.
Janet, I'm glad to know that you know about contracts, because this entire city is run by third-party appointees and contractors. Judge Bergen, the presiding judge of the Superior Court, was at the Board of Supervisors asking for a $1.8 million contract to do something, to send contractors out to deal with people who are in jail, who are having trouble. His job is not to write law or to relinquish his duties or his judicial authority to some contractor that he has no control over. If a man or a woman is in jail and they're having problems, and I have tried to help people in jail who can't get proper drugs, who can't get proper medical care, that person should have the ability to send a motion to the court. And if we need to hire more judges, then do it. But what happens is that these contractors are unregulated. And the court, when you call the court and you say, well, this person just, overprescribed drugs to my child, this third-party appointed psychological evaluator. And judges are taking lead. They're taking the lead from them. I'm sorry, I'm making a speech. The question is, what do you know about contracts? And there are 460 contractors just with the Department of Child Safety.
Well, I've been doing contracts now for about 10 years, so I think I have a pretty good sense of contracts. But the kind of contracts I work in are with the federal government, and they're heavily regulated by the federal acquisition requirements. The city of Tucson, too, has a number of contracts. When you spoke the Board of Supervisors, naturally that's outside of the jurisdiction of the city of Tucson. City of Tucson judges are appointed, by the way, just as is the city attorney. And they need to make sure that they're doing their job. But with regards to contracts and how I would manage them, that is up to the procurements department, and the procurement department is managed by the city manager. If it's proven there is wasteful spending, then the city manager is accountable, as is the director of procurements. Again, the city mayor and council's responsibility is to establish policy, not run the departments. Now, I will go off on just a quick tangent, and that is when Tucson was having some economic troubles, I was working out in Wilcox at the Euro Fresh Gardens, and they use prison labor. And one thing that makes me horribly angry is how we treat prisoners during their sentence and after. Once they serve their sentence, I don't understand why we continue to punish our prison population.
Well, pre-trial, it's bad too.
Anyhow, that was my rant. I didn't answer the question. Procurement needs to be responsible for the contracts.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't have any experience with contract law. I'm not a lawyer, but I would certainly consult with the city attorney on those sorts of things.
Yeah, good luck there.
My company's been in business 55 years. We've have a lot of contracts. I have contracts with every single client that we've ever worked with, and we have contracts with all the media that we work with. We operate on a contract basis. To your point, I think that we need to look at the 5,000 employees that the city of Tucson currently employs. We're down about 500 from what the previous numbers were. We need to get more out of them and provide them with the tools and resources that they need. We were with the Transportation Department this week, and they've just hired some new engineers and some people who, from the private sector, who have really good ideas about how to help fix the Tucson transportation system. And so we need to have a combination of both. We need to have really good Tucson employees who are working for the city of Tucson and maximize their strengths and make sure that we give them the tools and resources that they need. But in some cases, such as in water, perhaps in mental health and some other areas, contractors are needed because the expertise that they can provide to the city. And so when the city goes out for RFP to a contractor, it's because we're providing a service or wanting to be provided a service that might need some expertise in it. And advertising is one of those. We should be hiring a good advertising agency to handle the advertising for the marketing that needs to be done in order to recruit and retain police officers. And that process should go forward with the city manager. So I think contracts are important. They're part of the element.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
All right, hello, this is a four-part question. The first to all of you and second and fourth to each of you. How do you plan to win in this off-year election and prevent 4 more years of Regina Romero? And Mr. Ackerley, how do you plan to win as an independent? Mr. Kerschen, will your campaign result in a victory or just serve as a spoiler? Usually that ends up being a spoiler for the Republican. And Mrs. Wittenbraker, in a close race, how will you prevail when the Romero campaign sends out campaign materials for your libertarian?
I'll go first. I will tell you that when I made the decision back in 2018 to become an independent and run under the independent flag as opposed to Democrat or Republican, it was a strategic decision that I made. And I reinforced that this time by running as an independent. How do I expect to win? I expect to get all the independent voters that are no party affiliation. I expect to get as many Republicans as I possibly can, as many libertarians as I possibly can. But you know what? There is a group of Democrat voters that are not satisfied with the 7-0 council and what they've been doing the last 4 years. And I believe that if we can peel off some of those voters who are disenfranchised from their own party or some of these policies that have been implemented by the Democrats. So the strategy that I have is to get the entire community, Republicans, Libertarians, Green Party, Democrats, and these disaffected Democrats to vote for an independent candidate. And I think the timing is right. You know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, most political pundits would say that an independent can't win. I think you're seeing a shift. You know that the Republicans are 33.9% of the state of Arizona registration. Independents are 33.6%, and Democrats are 32.4%, I think it is. And so independents have taken on a huge impact in the state of Arizona in registration. The same is true in Tucson. Independents. Why? I posit that maybe they're fed up with the lack of moving forward in some of our legislative bodies and the councils and the board of supervisors. When you have a 7-0 council, all from one party, it really defeats the purpose of two-party government. We're having one-sided discussions and not listening to the rest of the people who perhaps need to be listened to.
Okay, Larry. Thank you.
As a libertarian, I know that libertarian candidates have rarely won city council positions or state legislative positions, but it does sometimes happen. And I like to think that as the government continues to grow on all levels, eventually people of Tucson and other places will see that the growth of government is a detrimental thing. And when everyone jumps ship and says, all right, I'm done with the Republicans and the Democrats, it's the libertarians that are the safe option. The option that won't implement any new government, but will instead repeal and let us rebuild, if necessary, a cleaner, more efficient, and a more honest government. That's why the libertarians are here, to give you the option to say, I'm done with this. I'm done with Republicans and Democrats. I'm done with graft and bribes and payoffs and corruption. I want a government that only does the very few things that government is authorized to do and doesn't try to do everything else. And that's what the Libertarian Party stands for. Thank you.
Doug, thank you for your question. I would not give away my strategy for winning, as much as I like all of you here. But I will tell you that Tucson vastly undervotes, primarily because of the off-year election, mostly because of apathy. Our city has given up, and we are seeing a resurgence. I would argue we're seeing that from the Republican Party. And the Republican Party is aligned with the Republican candidate. But people, everyone in this room, on election day, it is your duty to vote. And it's vote by mail only, and that's another reason those ballots don't make it in. If all 230 plus registered voters vote, the best candidate will win. To Arthur, when I first met Arthur, the first thing he said to me was, I'm not gonna drop out. And I said, I would never tell you to drop out, because we are a republic. And this is what it looks like. We give you our best candidates, and you decide who you want. And you encourage your neighbors to vote, and your friends, and you share your ideas. And then we will truly have that two-party government in Tucson. So get out the vote, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we are getting close to time. So I do have one question. It's for a specific individual, but I'm gonna ask each of you to answer it. But I'm only gonna give you 1 minute to answer this, okay? Please share the nonprofit organizations that you have worked with that are African American or people of color based. And it was initially for Mr. Ackerley, but I'm gonna ask everyone to answer. You mentioned in previous statements working with nonprofit organizations, so if you would answer that first, please.
Oh,
I've never worked for the NAACP or any African American organization, but I did start Coaches for Charity, which is a high school scholarship program, and it is for high school athletes all across Tucson. The Kickoff Classic, the Martin Luther King tournament that happens at McHale Center on MLK Day in January. We've run that tournament for, we're in our 19th year on that. And so that organization has a large African American engagement because of sporting and athletics and scholarships for students. We gave away, at the MLK tournament, we gave away, I think, 14 scholarships, and I think of those, I'm going to say about 11 of them were African Americans. And so we do, Coaches for Charity is one. I also was part of the American Advertising Federation, and many of the people who work in advertising, specifically in Chicago and some other places, have large agencies that are African American, and I was the chairman of that organization.
Thank you.
I have not ever been part of a nonprofit organization that was supportive of specifically African Americans. I was in the Navy for 8 years.
You said we're people of color.
People of color. And when I was in the Navy, when I was on a reservist station here at Davis Mountain Air Force Base, or we have a Navy facility that's built as part of the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base just for reserve service. You said there was only 8% or 4% of Tucsonans were African American, and we definitely had more percentage than that among our Navy reservists. And we also had plenty of Native Americans as well, and Hispanics, and you know, there's no discrimination in the Navy, and that's where I had a lot of experience. Thank you.
In certain circles, I'm known as the super volunteer. I love volunteering, and I volunteer with many organizations, but my passion is in diverse abilities. And in that organization, I volunteer with the Lions Club of Arizona. I'm also the Director of Communications for our Employee Resource Group for Diverse Abilities. And previously, when I was with Raytheon, I was the Engagement Manager for Diverse Abilities. My focus is on diverse abilities because I myself have experienced a disability. And that is where I felt most affected. As a person not of color, I haven't felt the impacts. And again, we open that dialogue, we have that conversation. But I can tell you the Lions Club includes many people, persons of color, as does every organization we have. Did I time it? Sorry. Connie, you need to be more.
Thank you so much. So we are going to give each of you an opportunity. Each of you will have 3 minutes to say any closing as far as why you should get our vote. We've heard a lot today. We've talked about fentanyl use. We've talked about the state of the city. We've talked about the lack of diversity or even being able to feel seen in this city. So I open it up to you all. Say what you would like. You do have 3 minutes each to wrap it up. And we can start.
Well, start with me. I have the mic, and I'm going to take less than 3 minutes. You have certainly heard from me today. And you've heard about my education. You've heard about my work experience. I've worked with many people in the diverse ability community, as well in the different positions that I've held throughout my 35 years plus of career experience. But what you will know from me and what you have my promise is I will always share my truth. I will not skirt around an issue because I think you'll receive it unfavorably. But it doesn't mean my truth is always the right truth. And when I say it takes a village, it will take a village. And so I will always listen to reason and logic and form a decision. As mayor, they don't give you a playbook. You don't know all of the magic. You have to figure it out, and the way you figure it out is by listening to your constituency. And that is my promise. And I'll tell you, when I worked in the city manager's office, the city manager never met with the constituents, the mayor never met with the constituents, and that will change on day one. Because someone out there does have a cure for homelessness and fentanyl usage. Someone out there knows that. You just have to hear it from the right person. So that's my promise. You'll hear my truth, but my ears are open for yours. That's it. I hope it took less than 3 minutes. I'm tired.
Well, I don't want you, I believe you should vote for me, especially if you believe in minimal government. I have a lot of experience in Tucson and years and children that I care about, that I want to be brought up in a friendly environment and a peaceful place. And grandchildren too. I believe that you shouldn't just vote for me, but you should all re-register as libertarians. I think that if we all can just unite behind the notion of taking government to its lowest level, to reducing the size of government instead of expanding, reducing government intrusion into our private lives instead of expanding, we would be moving in the right direction. Thank you.
You know, your mind wanders sometimes after you answer a question. You say, well, I should have said that. Nobody's ever asked me from the NAACP or any organization of African American or color to come aboard and help them with their initiatives. I volunteer. If you need some help, I would be happy to step in and help you lead an organization like that. So I'll take you up on that.
An email this evening.
Okay. I also neglected to say that I'm a doctor of leadership, educational leadership, and I think that's an important thing to know, that I not only have I practiced leadership in my business and in the private sector and nonprofit world, I also have a doctorate in leadership. And I believe that's what Tucson needs right now. We need somebody to step forward and to stand up at city council meetings, literally stand up and ask the question, why are we talking about this when we have a public safety problem, when we have a traffic problem, when we have a fentanyl problem, when we have a homelessness problem? Why are we talking about 1 million trees? Who gave us that order that we're going to talk about 1 million trees? I'm not against 1 million trees at some point, but we got to do the blocking and tackling first. And so I'm about public safety, I'm about economic stimulus, I'm about good jobs for people, I'm about making sure that the South Side specifically has pure, clean water to drink, and that we make sure that we have enough water for the coming century. I'm about cleaning up these parks so that my grandchildren can go to the parks and enjoy them with their grandma, and not say that they can't go because of the situation in the parks. I'm about streamlining the court system that we have in Tucson, and they need some help. The libraries, all the core services that we provide. My issue is leadership. What we need is strong leadership. I want to thank the NAACP and Delta Sigma Theta for inviting us today. Janet and Arthur, I thank you very much for stepping up and running, representing your parties. I am honored as a lifelong Tucsonan to have the true honor of running as a candidate. The very best thing that happens in this position. As Janet said, this is hard to do, but the number one thing that makes it so powerful are the stories that people come up and tell me about the reason they live in Tucson, the reason they started businesses here, the reason they stay here, the reason they work here, and they just want to see a better Tucson. I'm the guy that's going to help them live out that dream of living in a place that is the best place in the world to live in, Tucson, Arizona, that people come from all over the world to visit. Let's make sure they come more often, spend more money, and then take off, and leave their taxes here so that we can provide the services that we need. When November 7th comes around, remember the name Ed Ackerley, and if you would, I would appreciate your support and your vote. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone, there you have it. Thank you so much for spending the evening with us. You're going to say something really nice to me, but I can't.
I asked you that question earlier. You got excited starting the forum about the mayor's response. What happened? This is her award, for God's sake.
She was invited, but she was unavailable this evening. She was unavailable.
Appreciate that.
That's just unavailable. All right, so thank you all for being here this evening. I hope that this was a great opportunity for you to ask questions, and perhaps if you didn't know what you wanted to know, you learned something that would be useful for you in making your decision about who you will vote for. Please share. You can give shout outs for your websites and things like that. I think it's very important for us to dig deeper. But the purpose of this is really to engage the community. We often talk about educating one another and raising awareness, and we say things like just go out and vote. But if you do not know what you're voting about or who you're voting for, the issues and who they are, then when they get into office, then perhaps they will not be doing the things that you hoped they would do. So we need to be informed voters. So I hope you see this as an opportunity to increase your awareness and get more involved in the political process. Maybe there are things you realize you don't like about this, or maybe this is something you want to get involved in. But this is really important for us as we strengthen our community together. I'm so pleased with the diversity in this room. I know there are many different communities represented here, and I want to say thank you to my amazing co-moderator, Laura McAlpin-Miller. She's incredible. Thank you to the committees that worked to prepare. Thank you to those of you who walked in today early and just started helping out. Really appreciate that. And we just hope that you have a wonderful evening. We are going to transition to a reception, and I think folks will stick around until 8 o'clock, so have some more refreshments. We do have QR codes, so if anyone needs assistance with how to work those QR codes, we are happy to help you with that, but we do want you to complete a survey so we can gather information. Data is really important. We don't want to do things just to do it. We want to make sure that we are informed. So please give us your feedback in that.
I really don't have much to add, but the QR code is very helpful. It's just a brief survey about how you like the event, and it helps us to know what we need to do better next year. You know, part of it is just having the conversation that everybody was talking about. We don't normally get into a room with people that don't necessarily agree with us. We have different parties that are represented, and I think this is a beautiful thing. Part of it is just us coming to the table and talking to one another and talking to your neighbors and people that you wouldn't normally speak with. So on behalf of my chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, I just want to thank you guys for coming. If you do want to learn more about some of the things that we are doing in the community, you can go to TucsonAlumni.org and learn about what Delta is doing in the community. Our next big community event is September 24th. It's called Jazz in the Garden. It's a really great fundraiser, so definitely come out and support us. Do you have a question?
Yeah, after the primary, are you going to have another forum?
Our
Is
hope.
there another opportunity?
Our hope is to do more like this in the community. We did do a city council event that was on June 12th, and we got a lot of great feedback, and we realized that Tucson didn't really have an ongoing forum of this nature. So we hope to grow, get bigger and bigger. Hopefully we start packing out the auditorium at the school. So, I mean, the goal is for us to keep doing this, especially for local elections, because we know that a lot of these elections get lost in the mix because people show out for the presidential primaries and just check down the party line box. But we want to make sure that everybody is an educated voter and that you aren't just voting your party on down, and that you're actually getting to know some of these candidates, especially the ones that make the laws that affect you. Yeah. Yes, sir.
It'd be a good idea if you did this with some of the city council people.
We did it on June 12th.
So they get more exposure, because usually what happens, they get such minimal exposure.
Yes.
Because they never, the news sort of covers them, and they don't get a lot of excitement.
Yeah, we had all wards represented at our June 12th one, so we'll make sure that if you guys put your email on there, that you get a hold of the next one. So we are looking forward to do more like that. Yes.
Is there any other tactic that you guys might be using, whether it's like through, well, I mean, I'm guessing it has to be through your organization, since y'all are the one putting these forums, to try to get Regina Romero to come, because I think we as voters, we deserve to know kind of where she's at and why, if there's any Regina voters in here, why they should give her another 4 years.
So we sent out the invitation, of course, planning, so we needed to make sure we selected a date that worked. And we threw that date out, and we didn't wait to see who could be here, who couldn't, and do the kind of back and forth trying to negotiate a date and time. And so she just happened to not be available. But she did touch base with me and said that if there is an opportunity in the future, that she would like to be involved. So perhaps we just, need to think about planning and scheduling and things like that, but perhaps there will be an opportunity for that in the future. And you can certainly reach out to her directly and ask her the questions. I mean, that's something that I hope you get from this. We are voters, and I wrote down, someone was saying something, it was about contracts. I had a whole side note about contracts. But accountability. It is important for us to hold the folks that we elect accountable. And you may feel like your email goes into, no person's land, but let me tell you, email, call, do it over and over again. I was at the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday. Be present in these spaces and have your voice heard. There's an opportunity for call to the audience. You can speak. You can be there every week. It's so important.
At the city council meetings.
That's right.
They're
Study
open
sessions.
to the public.
Be there because that's where decisions are being made. And so we will certainly look into a possibility of having something with her.
Thank you.
All right, enjoy.
All right,